Hello, everybody. This is GM Jesse Kraai, and I've been away for a while. I played in a tournament in Mexico, and then after that, I played in China, where we played a chess tournament there called the World Mind Games, World Mind Sports Games, something like that. The Chinese, their English isn't so great, but they come up with these great aphorisms that no one even could create on their own. And there it was a tournament where Go was played, Zhangqi, which is Chinese chess, bridge, and checkers. All of them were played in the same tournament hall, so it was a very new and interesting experience. And one thing that was done there in terms of chess was that we were all playing rapid games. We weren't playing very serious long games. And I had never really played rapid chess before and didn't really know what to expect. And I was able to do quite well. And today I'd like to talk about rapid chess, how it differs from regular chess, and maybe what things one should be looking for in rapid chess as opposed to normal chess. So this was played with 25 minutes each side got, and then I believe you get 2 seconds for every move, so you can't actually lose on time. Now, in this game, my opponent is I am Roberto Del Campo from Mexico, and I had actually seen him the week before in Chihuahua, so this is a very small world. And Roberto I'm going to refer to in this lecture as El Diablo. That's what he's known by in Mexico, primarily due to his fortitude in the post-tournament fiesta that is always going to happen. Okay, so here we go. So he's playing the King's Indian. And so we get the standard position, and Roberto plays, or Diablo plays, bishop g4. Now, bishop g4 is not a very regular or common move, and there's some interesting prejudices, I think, as to why this is played so much. The first being that most King's Indian players see their light square bishop as their pride and joy of the position. And in particular, if you're going to get a structure where black plays e5 and white plays d5, the bishop on g7 will be bad, and indeed you don't want to exchange this light square bishop. That's the primary question or problem that black's going to have with this bishop move. The next is, in general, my bishop wants to go to e3, and I do play bishop e3 now. And it's oftentimes difficult for white to develop his bishop to e3 because the knight on f6 can molest it with knight to g4. Now, nevertheless, though, when we just look at the move bishop g4, it's hard to believe that it could be all that bad. It's a developing move after all, and black doesn't have to play e5. He has other ways of playing it. And we see that here with Roberto's move, knight fd7. So he spends a tempo, but he unmasks the bishop on g7, and he's going to really concentrate on the square at d4. And he can do that by both c5 and knight c6, trying to really open up the dark square bishop on g7. And of course, in this regard, the bishop on g4 is helping by taking away the main defender of the d4 square, which is the knight on f3. So, there's been many different tries here for white, but I played a move that is a little bit controversial based on principles, but I think makes sense. I played queen b3. So, white tickles the b7 pawn, and white is aiming for some quick development. In particular, I'd like to put a rook onto d1. When I put a rook on d1, it'll be a little bit more difficult for black to make breaks like c5 or e5. And in general, I'm controlling my d4 square. In the Go world, as I found out, one of their favorite sayings is, your vital point is also your opponent's. And I don't actually know what that means, but in this case it means that the pawn on d4 is important to both players. Now, Roberto plays b6. So this stops my attack on b7 and prepares c5. And in general, I think a philosophy that black could have here is simply that the queen on b3 isn't necessarily developed in this position, because it's not really well placed. And I think that's true, but I do now get to play rook d1. And in our previous encounter, the week or so before, I had castled, which was a horrible mistake. The king really doesn't belong on the side of the board. Rook d1 is much stronger. And here black is going to be really placed with a decision. And it's not so easy to see how he can take or fight control of this for the center. If, for example, knight c6, I have queen a4. And there's going to be difficult for the knight. Like, for example, knight a5, white can play b4. So Roberto plays c5, and I play d5. Now, Nimzovich says that the point of having the center is to make your opponent's pieces bad. And in this case, we really see that the knight on b8 is going to be suffering a little bit, and that's why I played d5 instantly, is that I knew I had to give some grief to his pieces. So knight a6 was logical. He has to try to do something with that knight. Castles. Knight c7. And now rapid chess. I just played a4. Maybe there's other moves, but this just seemed to make too much sense. So I played a4, and here I think the opening phase of the game is done, and we can talk both about the black position and what this rapid chess business is all about. The black position is very difficult to play here, and in a lot of ways I think this is a good example of how to play against the bishop g4 variation in the King's Indian. And one thing I found in this tournament was that opening preparation can be very deadly in the rapid, because the side who isn't prepared is going to have a lot more difficult time trying to thread the needle out of the situation. And for example, here it's really hard to see what black's plan should be. And in particular, the bishop on g4 is still a valuable asset for black. He would like to keep it. Even though the bishop on g7 looks strong, really the pawns on e7, d6, and c5 generally tell us that the light square bishop, black's light square bishop, is going to be his best piece. So I think a natural plan would be to play something like a6 and rook b8, and even though black isn't going to actually bring off the b5 break anytime soon, he at least will be able to kind of hang that threat over my head for a while. And it's in a rapid game, I could make some kind of mistake. As it was, the Diablo came up with an interesting plan, which I didn't approve of in the game, and that was knight b8. So first of all, he's responding to my move a4, and he sees that he can bring a knight now to sit on b4 himself. However, a knight on b4 isn't necessarily going to be so impressive. And with knight b8, he's moving his knight away from the center. But he also has another idea, which we see, and that is with after h3, he actually wants to play bishop d7, so to preserve his good piece there. And there's, he's preserving the good piece, but he's really also breaking a fundamental rule in chess, which is when you have less space, like black does here, you really want to exchange pieces. You want to send your kids off to college, get them out of the bathroom fight. And here we definitely see that the bishop is not only blocking the knight, but blocking the queen in, and blocking in particular the queen's access to the square d6, which we'll see is important. So I played bishop f4. And one thing I should say here is that I've been able to move fairly quickly through here, and this is a huge advantage in the rapid. having a 5-minute lead is very important, and it makes your opponent's situation all the more difficult to play. And especially when you're just establishing the pressure, that's also going to usually result in a time advantage. So bishop f4, I would like to play e5, and when I play e5, I'm going to be pressuring d6, and we'll see that I'm also going to be blocking the bishop on g7 once that happens. So very simple play. And the Diablo comes up with an interesting plan. He plays h6, e5, g5, bishop g3, and now bishop f5. So he's found a way to activate this bishop, his good bishop, and at the same time to have the queen on d8 now control d6. Now I think in this position I would say white should be very close to strategically winning. Better central control, better pieces, a weakened king side by black. But the thing I think black was banking on here is that he really doesn't have any significant weaknesses at the moment. And that's going to be white's really objective, is to create some kind of problems in the black position. Also, even though the knight on b8 doesn't do anything now, it at least has a plan of going and landing into b4. Now here, my next move is okay, but I think what I should have done is just traded off that bishop on f5 immediately with bishop d3. And I'll talk a little bit more about why that's the case in a little bit. But I just played naturally. Rook fe1. Black follows his plan. Bishop f1. Knight b4. And now I tsuji that knight with rook d2. So black isn't going to do anything with me. Now, when I foresaw this position, I was thinking that I would later be able to play a move like knight e4, and that would necessitate black trading off his good bishop for my knight. But now black makes an interesting move, and he just plays knight e8. So knight e4 would be a little bit redundant now, because I wouldn't actually be attacking the d6 square, and there would be no need for black to take on e4. And the reason I wanted to show this game is I thought my next, the plan that I came up with here was very simple and strong, and was particularly good in the rapid game. So let's talk first about the position before we talk about the rapid. The bishop on f5 and the knight on b4 are simply black's best pieces. The knight on e8 is really miserable, and the bishop on g7 is as well. And they're both miserable, I think it's important to see, because of the central force of the pawn on e5. Now, of course, black can always take on e5, and that would in a certain way liberate both the bishop on g7 and the knight on e8. However, once he does that, and I take, say, with the knight, there's going to be this problem of the knight landing onto c6, and if you trade on e5, then that bishop we'll see is going to kind of be missing from the defense of the black king side. And in general, white will have a very simple strategy if black takes on e5, and that is simply to double or maybe even triple on the e file, and that will make black's life very miserable. So the plan that I thought was very good here for the rapids, and probably in real chess as well, but was just very simple and easy to do here, was my plan was to exchange black's best two pieces, the knight on b4 and the bishop on f5. And it was a little bit counterintuitive to me, because in general I didn't feel that the knight on b4 was a great piece. Like, there's no reason for me to think that the knight on b4 is better than the knight on c3. But what the knight on b4 does do is it prevents me from exchanging the bishop on f5 with bishop d3. And once I can exchange off that bishop, then the light squares around the black king will become very weak. And of course, it's just his best piece. So if I can get rid of it, I'll be doing much better. So the simple plan I did was knight a2. This, of course, is going to commit me to temporarily moving my queen out of the action. So there we have it. The queen goes back, but now black really can't stop me from playing bishop d3. Knight c7. Now, no rush to play bishop d3. I might as well take back with the queen. So I play queen b3, knight a6, bishop d3. So goal achieved. Bishop takes, queen takes, knight b4, and simply now queen e4. Yeah, and white has just a very nice domination in the position now. Again, there's this problem that black will compromise his position significantly if he takes on e5, and he doesn't really have any counterplay to speak of. So he begins with queen d7, and I simply play b3. Now he plays a6. So maybe black will play b5 and open up his rook, and if I can, I'd like to avoid at least allowing any kind of counterplay. And so the question is how white should proceed in this position. And one thing I should say about the rapid that was happening here is because my position was so pleasant and black's position was not, we were already in a situation where I had something like 16 minutes left, and my opponent had something like 3 or 4. And what I understood in this game that helped me play the rest of the rapids better was that first of all, when you have the better position, you don't need as much time to play moves. There's less danger to you. If you make an inaccuracy, at the worst, there's less dangers for you than when black in this position makes an inaccuracy. Because then when black makes an inaccuracy, the whole game's just going to fall apart. And so when black then has to think about how to respond to white's plans, white can really try to anticipate black's moves. And that's what I was doing here. So I played now h4. And this is logical. Now that the bishop's gone from the defense of the king side, white should be able to start an attack against the black king. Okay. g4 was played. And here was maybe the only part in the game I had to do some correct calculation. Because if I play e6, which looks very logical, with the idea that if fe, we have queen takes g4, white is obviously completely on top. But the problem is, after e6, black has this very nice move, f5. And now things aren't so clear. For example, takes, and when the knight moves, I'll have a problem with bishop c3. So this didn't work out. Simply, though, I have an easy way of playing with knight h2. Black has to come forward. And now when he comes forward, it's a situation where the black king is getting more and more opened. And now simply f3. This maneuver is seen a lot. Oftentimes on the queen side of the board, we'll see this in Sicilians and such, where we have black playing b5 and white playing a4, b4, knight a2, and then breaking with c3. And here it's just too much for black, because if I get my knight into the game with, say, pawn takes pawn, knight takes pawn, the threat of knight g5 is too much. And notice that that pawn on h5 is very lonely. However, what is he to do? And so, with little time left, my opponent decided to finally bite the bullet, take on e5. But, I take on e5, and black will have, if he takes my bishop now, he'll have two problems. Well, more than two problems. g4 is hanging, h5 is hanging, e7 is hanging, complete mess. And notice how the knight is dominated by the rook on d2, and it's really not even playing a role in this game. So my opponent in rather desperate time pressure here. Took with the bishop. So bishop takes, and now f5. This isn't going to work out, but it's clear that this is the kind of desperation one will find in a rapid game. Queen f4 takes, and of course now queen g5, and the black position's falling apart. If king f7, I have queen h5, so black plays king h8, takes, king g7, and now I simply take on e5. Rook f6 was played, because I was threatening queen g5 myself there. And now I just take the pawn. I'm not so interested in winning the pawn. I'm more just want to get my knight into the game. As does my opponent. And he ends the game essentially here with knight c6. After which I have queen g5 check, rook g6, and now because the queen guards the rook on d2, I can take the knight on c6. And here the Diablo resigns. And I understood in this game some of the basic principles of rapid, and I guess those would be, first of all, making the best move is not what rapid chess is about. It's really about playing very simple, intuitive moves. Who is the better intuitive player, and who can keep kind of the balance of the situation when you're being pressed. And we saw that here, that really the initiative is worth a lot, probably more in rapid chess than it is in other forms of the game. The initiative will force the opponent to make more accurate moves, and any slip will go horribly wrong. So, this is GM Jesse Kraai, hoping you've learned something about rapid chess. I don't think it's that serious of a game, though more and more of our tournaments are being conducted at fast time controls. So until next time, bye-bye.